and I am joined here on the inaugural episode, the intro that now is totally derailed already. This is the inaugural episode of my new podcast, Coffee Books Repeat. Sam is happy. That's the one that she wanted.
Yes.
And I am joined today by a host of young authors to talk about really annoying literary rules that seem to get foisted on us from certain quarters of the literary establishment or random people on the internet, that maybe they shouldn't be such absolute rules. Maybe they shouldn't be rules at all. We all have our personal favorite bad rules to hate, and we're here to talk about them a little bit today. And I am joined by let's just do a roll call here. We've got Ferry over here coming at us from Germany. And we have Crystal coming at us from the deep south.
Hello. The
and
deep south.
And over on the west coast, we've got Sam with the Rockin' Joker mug over there. And we have Moose also over on the west coast, who wrote the article that sort of gave me the idea for this, talking about the annoyance of the absoluteness of the passive voice rule. She wrote an article on that in her alter ego as Ivy. And so, Moose, you have the floor.
That's right. The idea for this post came to me when one of my many Facebook writing groups found some article somewhere about how to spot passive voice, how to know when you're using it too much. And I guess it was just the straw that broke the camel's back, or whatever that phrase is, for me, because it solidified to me just how absolute so many writers seem to find these rules. Like, passive voice is bad, you cut it out. Like, anytime you see passive voice, you just cut it. And it kind of got under my skin a little bit, so I decided to write about it and clarify exactly what passive voice is, because that was another point, because a few months earlier before that, I had gone on Twitter, because I honestly, at that time, I didn't actually understand exactly what passive voice was. So I went out on Twitter and I said, okay, who can clarify this for me? What actually is passive voice? And I got so many replies to that almost so many of them contradicted each other, which just clarified to me just how little we actually understand these supposed rules.
Exactly.
So
you gave a good example in your article of how it actually looks on paper, and actually an example of when you would want to use passive voice.
Exactly. So I ended that particular post by saying, let's see. Which brings us to the primary reason simplifying writing rules is dangerous. Context. Active voice, we can't know how a character is feeling without knowing what else is going on in the scene. Without knowing the context, it's impossible to say without absolute certainty whether passive voice or active voice is preferable. Most of the time, active voice will work best, but sometimes passive voice is better, such as when the person who is acting is unknown or needs to remain anonymous. Perhaps a character is the murderer and the detective only sees the evidence. Also, when the person acting is irrelevant or the object acted on is more important. Perhaps the treasure is hiding inside the ball, in which case focusing on the ball will foreshadow the moment the treasure is found. Ironically, that example I just said is written in passive voice, and it should be, because the focus in that sentence is on the treasure, and it doesn't matter that it's hidden in the ball or who finds it in the end.
Exactly.
And the third and final situation in which passive voice might be better is when no one specific is acting. When something is, balls were hitting the walls all over the court, for example. So.
Oh, of course. And then you gave the great example of somebody noticing that it had been snowing outside, when the use of the word had is often considered, just because you have the word had in the sentence, that's passive voice and that's bad, and you'll get your manuscript sent back to you with a line through it. When in reality...
That also touches on another writing rule issue that drives me crazy, is the bad word lists, because that was one of the definitions that someone gave when I sent that question out on Twitter, was that if you're using was or had or has or is or like this whole long list of words, if you're using these words, then the sentence is wrong, or you're using passive voice, and which is so frustrating, because those specific words are not problematic in and of themselves. They're simply symptoms of a deeper problem. So to tell a writer, avoid these words and you're good, you're telling them how to fix the symptom rather than explaining the deeper problem, which doesn't help them become a better writer. That just helps them avoid breaking rules, which, as we all know, rules are more like guidelines.
Exactly, especially when it comes to things like this, when the rules change over time. Now, speaking of rules, just rules change over time. Sometimes they change in different, from one genre to the next. Like Crystal, you primarily do screenwriting. I imagine some of the rules are a little bit different there than they are when it comes to writing short stories or novels.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like with the way you have to write scripts, but even if you were to write a book in like past tense, passive voice is pretty much unavoidable, because it's stuff that isn't actively happening, or there's some things you want to leave a mystery. Like when we talked before, I told you with passive voice would be used in screenwriting if you wanted to highlight a specific thing, which would denote someone reading it that's what the camera would focus on. Like, for example, the example Moose used of the treasure being in the ball. Now, if you using passive voice to describe that will basically tell the reader, okay, the camera's going to focus on the ball, not who's kicking the ball. And it really changes the meaning of the scene. Like, I'm basically repeating what Moose said.
That's good. But what other rules might be, that apply in screenwriting, or in your short stories that you've written for the epic anthology Winter Neverland? Find it on Amazon. And just what are some of the rules that you've come across that bug you?
I can't really think of anything specifically with like the grammar or anything with screenwriting or anything. But what does bug me is something that's often described as a rule in characterization of characters, pretty much. Okay. And that's when people say you shouldn't write a single pure evil character. Like, not at all, ever, not in any context and in any story. You shouldn't write a pure evil character. And I've always found that a little odd because I primarily write in the supernatural genre. And in the supernatural genre, you deal with pure evil, basically, because there's exceptions, like half human, half angel, whatever. So there's going to be more human qualities and whatnot. And you can humanize werewolves and vampires. But when it comes to like writing demons and whatnot, it's not always easy, or it's not always a common thing to make them more of a gray area character. When you write demons, they're usually pure evil because they're made of pure darkness, because they're from hell. They're from hell, so of course they're pure evil. And so I always found that rule to be kind of interesting because it doesn't address the exact issue that comes with writing pure evil characters. What comes with the issues that come with writing pure evil characters is how the writer handles it, not the fact that it's being done at all. Because you still have to give a pure evil character motivations and laws and things that help them thrive, but
and still somehow avoid making them sympathetic in a way.
yeah.
Well, see, I think that's another case of trying to oversimplify writing rules, because I think what most of the people that argue against purely evil characters, what they're actually arguing against is flat characters.
Yeah.
Villains who have no motivation. They just want to take over the world because that's what villains do. Which isn't speaking out against purely evil characters. That's speaking out against unmotivated characters. When your villain is doing things for seemingly no explainable reason, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are purely evil. It's a completely different concept.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually an interesting thought. The problem isn't that they're evil. The problem is that but it's not even that we don't know why they're evil. It's just that, okay, so they're doing stuff so that so that the hero has something to react against. That's literally the only reason that they're there in a lot of stories.
It's like the Saurons of the little world, which a lot of people. Because the thing is, a lot of readers of LOTR or of the movies see Sauron as this nebulous evil entity floating out there somewhere that everyone's fighting against, but no one really knows. Except for the fact that if you read like the Silmarillion and all of that other stuff that comes before it, that's where Sauron's motivation is found. In all of that.
Yeah.
So it's like
I said,
it's a lot more complicated than a lot of people want it to be.
Yeah.
Villains could be a whole separate episode, actually. Talking about our favorite villains, why we love them, or our least favorite villains and why we hate them. Now, Barry, you're over there in Germany. Now, do you have a different experience with some of these things? Is this a common thing across the board amongst the literary world, or do you find that over in Germany maybe they're emphasizing different rules than they would over here in the U.S.?
Well,
and which ones annoy you?
Well, to be honest, I'm just physically here in Germany, but. Like the rules I'm following, actually I'm writing in English, and the rules I'm following, like articles I'm reading and everything, like basically I'm like basically in America. So so again, like I would if I start talking I would just repeat the same things Moose said.
Fair enough. But what about any other rules? There's a ton of them out there.
So compared to the other guys, I'm relatively new to writing, but like when I started, I was bombarded with this like rules, and like I was so confused. Like I didn't know. I thought like I would never be a writer. Like things like as simple as like show don't tell, or like make your character sympathetic, and like they always like every blog. You see, they always say this is an absolute. Like you always have to show, for example. And like sometimes like I think there should be only one rule: entertain your readers. And like if you're honest with yourself and you read the book, if it's something you enjoy as like not the writer but somebody that reads the book, it's probably something your readers will also enjoy. So it's just, in my opinion, it's as simple as that. You come back to your book like 1 month, 2 months after you wrote it and just read it.
Well, and a lot of, it's funny, what a lot of blogs, like writing blogs, seem to miss, that most of the writing books, like the writing craft books that I've read, always touch on is that when it comes right down to it, the only rule you need to be following is to write a book that entertains you. Write a book that you want to read.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, yes. If you want to read it, well, hopefully somebody else wants to too.
Right.
Now, Sam, you and Crystal were going over a list of these things the other day, I understand.
Yeah. So for me, this is just like kind of an interesting subject because I've had a lot of experience taking really technical writing classes and workshopping stories and stuff. So I've come across a lot of rules where there are some of them I totally understand why they're rules. And for me, it's kind of hard because I don't think any of these should ever really be rules because it really just depends on you as an author and like, you know, what you need for your story. So yeah, some of these I understand why they exist as sort of guidelines for writing. I think it's nice to think like, I'm just going to write a story that I love and I'm going to write a story that my readers are going to love. But when you want to actually write a good story, you do kind of have to follow certain guidelines to get yourself there. But some of them that Crystal and I think we were talking about earlier are just kind of silly. Like there was this one where I think it was, it said your sentences should all be as short as possible and like as concise as possible. And I mean, if you've ever written anything or even just read a book, you can see that that's kind of ridiculous in practice because it's just like you need to have a certain flow for your sentences. You can't just have them all be like 5 words long. So yeah, that's one that I've come across that I just thought was kind of silly. And for these, they're all, I feel like they all need to be used in some ways. And then in other ways you could understand like why there are actually guidelines. Like, you know, you want your readers to understand what's going on without confusing them. So you don't want them to have to read all these long sentences and be confused. But yeah, so most of the ones that I come across are pretty technical and I just kind of learned to take them with a grain of salt, you know, like if I find a way to use them, then great. If not, then I just kind of ignore them.
Yeah.
Well, see that with that specific rule, to be honest, because what that comes down to is not so much one. So what you said they said is keep your short sentences short and concise. But
all
the
your
rule they're actually getting at is that you need to be cutting unnecessary words. So it's not a matter of keeping your sentences short as it is a matter of not using more words than you need, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think
So
like
sometimes you need a lot of words to get the point you're making across.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I recently read a friend's chapter, and one of her paragraphs is one entire long sentence. It's absolutely a run-on sentence, but she kept that on purpose because she was trying to get across the character's anxiety as they were walking into school with their new best friend, who's like, that's a bit more than you need to know, but that's the point, is that she wrote that run-on sentence, which is, you know, there are a lot of rules out there that say you shouldn't write run-on sentences, but in this case, it worked because it got across the character's anxiety. So,
you know, and I think that actually is a great point. Your sentences should reflect the effect you want to generate in the reader. Like if you want them to understand that things are proceeding very quickly, then, you know, it's okay to have a run-on sentence where it's like, and this, and this, and this, and this. You know, I use Tolkien a lot as a touchstone because he does so many things so well, and he does that. He uses different sentence lengths, different styles, different cadences to convey the story. Like a battle may well have one sentence that's just and, or it'll have a lot of very short sentences that like this happened, that this happened. You know, creating a staccato effect that gives a reader a sense of what's actually happening in the story through more than just the words, through the actual flow of the words. And that's something that an oversimplification of the rules completely misses. And I think Sam and Moose, what you're both talking about, gets to something that we're kind of exposed to here in the digital age, where while we have the benefit of having to have Ferry come over from Germany and be a digital citizen of the English literary world, we also have a lot of people speaking talking like they really understand all of these different rules, that they understand the process without any real idea of what these things really mean and how they really apply. They just read a book, read a rule, said, "Oh, I understand this," and now they just view it as an absolute. And I think that's a unique problem of the digital era.
Well, it's also a bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. No, I was just gonna say that like most of these rules, in my opinion, are just guesswork. They're like people are trying to understand what makes a good book, and they just see one or two examples. I mean, not always, but like sometimes they just see one or two examples that worked for them, and then they say this is a common rule.
Mm-hmm.
And like even for long sentences, I think that we just talked about. I think as long as you don't confuse the reader, and they don't have to go over and over again to try to understand what you were trying to say, that's fine. Like, there's no set number of words, for example, that like you have to, you don't have, you shouldn't exceed this number of words. And this applies to like a lot of rules. Like I saw another rule like that was really like, I don't know, funny. It was like, literally, they said, "Don't kill the dog." I don't know if you've heard this rule.
I read that one the other day.
Don't kill the dog.
Yeah. Like, yeah, they just say basically don't kill animals.
Like what exactly?
It literally means don't kill the dog.
But why?
Like, don't kill animals in your book because I don't know, or don't kill children.
No, see.
Am I gonna upset PETA?
But that's what you just said, because I don't know. Well, if there's no why to go with the rule, then how am I supposed to know how to apply it?
Yeah, because they say it's sensitive, or I don't know.
Like,
people are sensitive toward children or animals.
Okay.
So
okay, if what we're getting down to is ranting, then that of basically everything is what drives me the most crazy. Is when you say don't do this, but you don't ever tell me why. Like, how does that help me? How?
Well, especially with a rule like that, like you can't harm certain characters. Now, I know from what limited experience I have by reputation and from actually reading their stories, Crystal and Sam, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to write hardly anything if you can't kill the dog or small children or the girl in the story.
We're just gonna be stuck writing Disney princess stories.
Exactly, and let's face it, not every story needs to be a Disney princess story. I like it when my bad guys do. I like my bad guys to do horrible things because
I think there was some advice that I heard a while back. I think it was Brandon Sanderson. And he said, when it comes to character sympathy, if you want your reader to like your character, show them saving a puppy. If you want your reader to hate your character, then show them kicking the puppy. Like,
but we have to kill the puppy. We just said
well,
the puppy's gotta know.
You get my meaning. Like there's no rule in that, but he was giving a tool to help you write your characters.
Right, exactly.
So
if there is a puppy, kick it or pet it, depending on what you want the readers to think about your character. And by golly, I should hate your villain. I should despise your villain. And I should love your hero.
Well, perhaps.
Unless your hero.
On what kind of villain you're writing?
Yeah,
maybe
well, that's
you
true
want
too.
a really sympathetic villain.
That's
maybe you
true.
want a sympathetic villain that you want to hate but can't help but love.
Or sometimes they're so interesting in the way that they're evil. It's like, man, I should hate this character, but I can't quite bring myself to do it.
Yeah, so I think I remember reading an article similar to that one where it talked about not killing the dog. And I actually try not to kill animals in my stories because there's something about the science behind your sympathy toward animals. Apparently, in books, readers tend to sympathize more for the animals than people, and they tend to be like more attached to the animals than human characters. So that's why it's like really sad when, you know, you watch a movie or you read a book where they kill the dog and you get so attached to the dog for some reason and not, you know, the main character who dies. And I think it's about your reader's investment into the story. And unless you want them to be really pissed off, you don't want to kill the one thing that they're really super attached to in the story. I mean, that's what I got from the article that I read about it.
No, that's fair enough. But that's interesting, though, that we have a distinct sympathy towards animals and stories.
Sorry, guys, my laptop just died.
I was just wondering what happened. I saw your little square disappeared. I'm like, well, did something happen? Did the Third World War start, or what?
Well, see, now we're getting into the exception to all of these rules, because then you have stories where they do kill the dog, and for some reason that no one can apparently explain, then it works. So that's one more reason really annoying writing rules need to be taken with a grain of salt, because no matter how many writing rules there are out there, there is someone out there who will be able to break a new one and make it work.
Yeah,
definitely.
So,
a great example. A great example of that. Oh, go ahead, Crystal.
Pretty much all writing rules can be broken. You just have to break it properly and correctly for it to pay off, but they can all be broken.
Because that's part of it, is if you understand the why behind the writing rules, then you can understand when it's okay to break them and when you need to follow them, because you understand the purpose behind them. Like the show Don't Tell. Like it's let's see, Orson Scott Card wrote one of my favorite writing craft books, Characters and Viewpoint. And I love what he says about the show Don't Tell. Some circumstances, that advice is good. Under others, it's exactly wrong. Storytellers concept between telling, ignoring. A lot of information that is important to the story is still not important enough to be worth a whole scene. So,
and you know what? You bring up exactly the right point. That we're definitely not, and anyone feel free to jump in here, but we definitely, I think, would all agree that it's not that rules in and of themselves when it comes to writing are bad. It's that one of you had mentioned, I think it was Moose earlier, that they're a little bit more like guidelines, and to break them properly, you need to understand what their proper purpose is. They do serve a purpose. They do form a bit of a fence, but sometimes you got to go outside the fence a little bit, or push it back just a touch.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. I think one of the reasons why there's like writing rules is because writing is really hard to teach. And it's actually one of the hardest jobs as a teacher, if you're trying to like teach people to write, isn't teaching them the craft, it's teaching them how they can write, because writing is different depending on who you are. And so I think that's why there's so many rules out there that people don't necessarily understand, because they're just not certain rules that really work for their writing. Like a good example is I was taking a workshop last term where we had talked about using like certain swear words in writing, and some people totally understood it, and that's the reason why those sort of guidelines exist, is because it can be applied to stories for a good reason. Like if you have a wide audience and you think that maybe some people in your audience might be kind of offended by you using swear words all the time, then yeah, that's a good guideline to follow. But then there's also times where you can break that guideline for certain reasons. Like if you want to put emphasis on a scene and you want to show like how your character is really suffering, and you have them using swear words, then that's a good reason to break that rule. So it's just, I think it's mostly just about knowing that these rules shouldn't be applied for everyone. They shouldn't, like, people shouldn't be able to use all the same rules for their writing because it's always going to be different for people. But like Moose said, it's always good to know when and how to break those rules so that you can actually have an original story and a story that's yours and not just like, you know, what everyone else is writing if they're all following this rule.
Yeah, the rules should be. And
I was talking. I had, still had my my microphone muted from when I was typing. Crystal, you're quiet over there.
am I?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, because pretty much everyone else is saying what I agree with, so I just be repeating it. Yeah, rules are. and Sam's right. You know.
Okay, so
We
here's
need a.
so here's a rule that I'm really curious to see what you guys think about. The use of said in dialogue tags. There are plenty of people out there who say you should never use the word said, and there are plenty of other people who say you shouldn't use anything but said.
That's true.
Yeah, I think it has to be like a balance between both, because there's just certain times where you just need to have a dialogue tag, but you don't want to put emphasis on the tag itself. You want to put emphasis on the dialogue. So that's another one where it just depends on what you're writing. Like sometimes you want to actually say how people are saying things. So you would say they whispered instead of they said. So it just, I think, depends on the scene and the context of the story.
Definitely, and I think it's kind of the same way with like the length of sentences. You need a variety of it to make it flow better. Because if it's just the same thing repeated over and over and over again, it's really not going to flow well. But if you use a variety and you change it up, then it's going to read smoother for the.
Though, because I've also heard it said that where was it? That the word said is honestly a bit like punctuation. Is that after a while, the actual word said almost disappears like the punctuation in a sentence.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yep. I also I've read the exact same thing.
Yeah, and sometimes that's good because sometimes, like I was saying, you just need to clarify who's talking. So, you know, if you're just using it as a tag and you don't want it to be just taking away from the dialogue itself, then said acting as punctuation is really helpful, I think.
Yeah. At the same time, the one other thing that I would add, like a thing that I would encourage people to avoid is having a tag that's too long. You know, so-and-so said breathily while looking off into the corner or something, you know, something like that, you know, where it gets
like a tag that includes action that like takes forever to describe. Right?
Exactly.
Sometimes it can be helpful though. I mean, like also before, like in certain scenes, if you want to break up this really long dialogue and show that they're doing stuff during the dialogue, then sometimes a long tag can be helpful. If you're afraid your reader to be bored of this long dialogue.
So when should it be a tag, and when should you just make it a separate beat? Like,
it just depends on the context, I think.
I think that's fair. You know, what I see done a lot, and certainly what I personally like, I like an action tag generally like before the dialogue.
Yeah,
I do that a lot in my writing.
Yeah, that's and that's something that I do think comes down to personal preference. I like the way it flows better, but then you have your tag, of course, you know, at the end of the dialogue, which will either just be said or describe the mood that the person is saying it in. That way it does break it up. Unless, of course, there's an action that has to happen literally right after the dialogue, then obviously that goes after. But they can still be broken up with different sentences, or there may well be a context where it makes sense to combine the action and the mood.
Yeah, I think personally, if it's a really long conversation that's going on between two different characters, I personally don't like to break it up too much where it's dialogue and then sentence of action, because you can really tell how the characters interact with each other if you just add those sort of action things within the dialogue, and it can help build their relationship. And like I said before, it's all about context, but yeah, generally in super long conversations where it would seem kind of choppy to break that up, I just keep the action in the tag usually.
Okay. Well, and that works. And I know it works because, like I said, I've read a little bit of Winter Neverland, still working on getting through it all because let's just say it's been a busy week. But
what are writers without their to be read lists?
Yeah,
exactly.
Miles, mountains.
Yes, the to be read and the currently reading list, which sometimes the currently reading list can be a pretty large pile in and of itself.
Right.
Now, there's a couple other rules that I've come across. Well, actually, first, before we get into that, a perfect example of someone who breaks one of these recently discovered absolute rules is J.K. Rowling. There's one of the biggest rules that you see repeated over and over again is thou shalt not use adverbs.
Yes.
I mightily insist that thou shalt not use adverbs.
You know what's really funny is the first few times I read the Harry Potter books, I didn't even notice it. Not even a little bit. So when the first time I heard J.K. Rowling touted as like the biggest name to ever break that particular rule, like Harry Potter is just littered with ly adverbs, and I was like, what? No, this is Harry Potter. Like, this is one of the best-selling books ever. Like, no way. And then, like, a few weeks ago, I started reading them aloud to my kid, and oh my gosh, they are everywhere. Everywhere. I'm like, holy crap, she does use a ton of adverbs.
Yeah, I just thought that rule was kind of interesting because I totally get why it's a rule, but it's like all the other ones that at the same time I can understand when you would need to break it. But generally for adverbs, especially if you're describing how somebody is saying something, it can get kind of weird in the dialogue tag. Like, it can just sound weird, and I think it's a lot better just to find another word that you could use to describe it, because just the ly at the end for some reason just doesn't flow with sentences, I feel like.
A lot of times.
Yeah, because that's another case of the rule identifying the symptom rather than the actual problem, which is weak verbs. So rather than saying he ran quickly, you could say he sprinted.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not only more concise, but it's a stronger verb. It paints the picture of what he's doing much more clearly.
Yeah, yes, but there are times, like you were saying in Harry Potter, there are times that it's better if you use an adverb. And I think I said before, most of these rules, I feel like I generally don't really spend too much time worrying about following these rules, because I kind of just think, is there a way I could do it better? And if there's not, then it's going to work for my book generally.
Right. Yeah, another thing that is unfortunately, very commonly omitted in a lot of writing blogs is that pretty much every writing rule out there does not apply to the first draft, like, at all, ever. Like, the first draft, its only job is to exist. That's it. So if you have to use a ton of cliches, you can fill it chock full of adverbs, throw in as many ridiculous dialogue tags as you want, because writing rules only come into it in the editing phase, when you make it pretty.
I almost don't. If you do your own editing, I would, knock yourself out. If you're submitting it to an editor as a guy who has to read that.
Oh, yeah, no. Well, I mean, how many people actually submit their first draft to like a professional editor. And
Oh,
if
you'd be
they do,
surprised.
Well, then I would say you probably shouldn't. Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the only people I've heard said they actually write really clean first drafts are people who actually are like technical writers for a living. Like, so they've had tons and tons and tons and tons of practice with all of this. And so yeah, as far as like professional editing, I mean, should definitely do your own editing at least a few times before submitting to like a professional editor.
Subjecting some poor guy to your to the cliche written first draft.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do agree. A first draft should largely be get the story out there, find out what works, find out what doesn't, and then if you've got beta readers, let them help you with that too.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. Like I think it's really hard to get lost in all the rules, especially when you're writing the first draft. But I'm also kind of torn because if you practice writing how you want it to be in the final draft, it's going to be so much easier to do that automatically in the first draft. So I'm kind of torn because sometimes it's good to focus on those rules like in the beginning because it can just help you practice to where you won't have to spend so much time working through those when you end up editing the final draft.
Well, maybe it's not necessarily focus on, but just like be kept in mind. Because I know with my first draft, I don't really think too much about it, but I have enough of it in mind to where if I notice something or catch it, I'll edit it right there. So it's kind of a balance of just getting it down on paper, but also kind of keeping in mind enough of it so that way you don't have to do as much taking out the bad and putting in the good in future drafts.
Yeah, it shouldn't slow you down.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And actually, Ferry, you're working on your first book right now, correct?
Yeah.
Now, what are you still working on your first draft? Are you on like your where are you?
Hard to say because I actually wrote a full book and then threw it away. And then I'm working on another book, and yes, it's just the first draft.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, are you how are you going about it? Are you worrying about the rules, or are you just kind of, if I, like Crystal said, if you catch it, great.
Yeah, exactly like Crystal said. So those that come to my mind and I can easily fix it right there, I do it. And things that I'm not sure or like, I don't edit as I go. I just focus on writing the story.
Very
so
good.
I don't go back and edit like every page or every chapter. I just write, and sometimes actually I know a chapter or a scene has to be deleted because like it's not relevant anymore, but like I keep it there and just I remove it after I'm done.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's what works for me at least.
Now we're getting close to the end. We're gonna have to wrap it up in about 10 minutes or so. So let's kind of go around a little bit. Crystal, have you ever gotten dinged on some sort of rule violation and you were like, no, you're wrong, or conversely, you know what, that's fair?
Actually, fortunately, I haven't had to deal with that. I mean, I don't even know. I'm trying to think if I even had to deal with that in school. I might have dealt with it in school, maybe by like teachers or something. But for the most part, I've been fortunate enough to receive. Well, okay, I either receive no proper feedback or I get really good feedback. So that seems to be what I tend to get. But one of the things I recall getting as feedback in school was actually going against like the short sentence rule. Because back in school, I still have the problem now a little bit, but back in school, I used to have a really bad problem of all my sentences being like the same length. And I was always told like you need a variety of sentence lengths to make your flow better. So as I think about it, it's kind of funny that the one thing I was constantly corrected on in school was actually going against a rule that people try and say you need to follow now, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You know, there should be a certain flow that just kind of helps move the reader along at an appropriate pace. There was a story I heard about William F. Buckley, actually, and I don't remember the specifics, but he picked some $5 word to put into a sentence. And somebody asked, well, what does it mean? I was like, it means this really simple thing. Well, why didn't you just say that? I needed the syllables. And I was like, okay, yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense. It's like, yeah, sometimes if you are wanting a certain flow, then yeah, you need to go for the $5 word. And you know what? Dictionary.com is on your phone, people. You don't know where to look it up.
Yeah.
And that does happen. I mean, even I've been reading a ton my whole life, and I consider myself to have a pretty good vocabulary, but it does happen. Still, not terribly infrequently, I'll come across a word and I was like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And it always bothers me. I'm not gonna lie, it always bothers me whenever I come across a word that I'm unfamiliar with. So yeah, it's usually straight to the dictionary, or at least I highlight it. All right, come back to that. But now, what about you guys? Sam and Moose, you guys get dinged by anything in particular that you just kind of bothers you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've taken so many workshops before that I just have an endless amount of, I'm sure, critiques that I was like, why did they say that? But the most recent one I can think of was, I think it was 2 terms ago, I took this workshop where I wrote a story in second person. And I don't know if you've heard of this rule, but there's this sort of well-known rule of never write a story in second person. If you want people to really like your story, never write it in second person. And I heard that rule before I even wrote the story, but I had a specific reason why I wanted to write it in second person. And about half of the workshop was like, I completely hated this. And half of the workshop was like, I totally understand why you did that. And so at a certain point, if you decide to break one of the rules, it's just a matter of, do you really feel like you needed to do that? And for this story, I did. So yeah, I was defending it all the way. I was just like, if you really look into it, you can understand why I did it. But yeah, some people just won't understand it, and that's going to happen no matter what you write.
This is true. One of the things that I noticed is I've noticed a lot more people that I work with writing in like first person presently, and I will typically at least challenge, like, you mean to do this? Because it's not typical. It's not the easiest thing to pull off either. It can be done. I've seen it done, but it's not easy. So I will challenge. It's like, or do you mean to do this? Do you really want to go down this road?
Yeah.
Okay, if you do, go for it. That's fine. If you do it well, good for you. And like I said, I have seen it done exceptionally well. One of the favorite books that I've worked on actually was written in first person present, and she knocks it out of the park. It was fantastic.
And there's reasons why people generally don't write that way, and so I can totally get it. But then also at the same time, people should be able to just test out those rules. Even if the story isn't great later, they'll understand why it's such a well-known sort of like rule of people not to write in certain ways, like second person or first person present.
Yeah, because it's hard. it's really hard to do. Yeah, but again, there are exceptions. Like when I first challenged somebody on it, they're like, well, Suzanne Collins had some pretty good success with it with Hunger Games, so all right, fair point. Which kind of seems like the thing you should be taking from this podcast is, if you want to be super successful and sell like a bazillion copies and get a multi-movie deal, find a rule and just break the ever-living crap out of it.
Yeah, as long as you do it in the right way, though. I mean,
yes.
Another thing where it's like I was saying before, you have to know why you're breaking the rule and how to do it to where it's okay that you broke the rule. Because I mean, sometimes it's like you should follow some of these rules just to get yourself to that good story that you want. But like we've been talking about, it just depends on your writing and what you want to do with your writing.
Absolutely. Now, we're pretty close to wrapping this up. So does anyone have anything else they want to add? Last chance for something for a favorite rule to rant about, or experience with getting dinged, or just, you know what, I'm just so darn good that it doesn't matter.
I have one particular story that will always stand out in my mind, mostly because this was the final straw for me regarding a particular writing group I was in. And it's what spurred me on to. I then spent the next year. I focused entirely on learning writing craft. I didn't worry about getting words down. I read book after book after book and blog after blog, just learning writing craft. And so the moment that happened was, okay, first of all, not only did she go through my entire submission and count exactly how many times I broke this particular rule, but she actually got the rule wrong. She admitted she couldn't quite remember exactly what the rule was, but she knew that this particular sentence structure was best to be avoided.
It's wrong. It's just wrong.
So she pointed out every single place that I had written a sentence with that particular structure and said, right? It. That was the point at which I was like, okay, I cannot come back to this writing group. Otherwise, I will say something I will regret. And I can't. I can't.
You know, that's something that people do need to understand. It's something that I always strive to remember when I am working on someone's manuscript. And that's, you know, you gotta allow the author a little license, a little room to push the rules. Or, you know what, maybe a lot of times I'll come across a phrasing that I don't like, but I'm like, okay, do I just not like it, or is it genuinely bad? And a lot of times it's like, you know what, I just don't like it. So it's like, okay, I unhighlight it and move on, because that's up to the writer if they want a character to have an odd way of speaking, or it's just like, you know what, this is the way I talk, so this is the way the phrasing goes. You know, fine. That's totally okay. Oh, you know what? Oh my goodness, we actually have. I did not notice this. We have a commenter all of a sudden in the YouTube chat.
Oh, exciting!
I see Lord Magma 15. I'm sorry. It's happening a lot earlier than thought. Yes, and actually, we're getting ready to wrap up there, Lord Magma. But don't worry, it'll be up here and it'll be available on SoundCloud and iTunes. If not tonight, then certainly it'll be available tomorrow. And yes, we agree wholeheartedly. Many rules are meant to be broken. So there you go, people who are watching this terrestrially after the fact, or of course listening audio. We do read your comments, and if you've been commenting on Twitter, I'm really sorry. I had to shut down my Twitter so that I could actually follow, so that there wouldn't be a lot of lag or anything. Bandwidth is what it is. I'm sorry. And I think that just about wraps it up for the day. Thanks for all of you guys for coming on. It's very cool hearing about everyone's experiences with these, with some of these rules, and actually a lot of the good insight into the fact that yes, the rules, but you know what? Sometimes you do have to break them. Just know what you're doing when you do it. So I want to give everyone a chance to plug wherever people can find you and whatever it is you're working on, and feel free to hawk your wares. Sam, go ahead.
Okay, well, you can find me on Twitter at Sam Baker Writes, and you can get my book Variant Wars and my anthology that I wrote with Crystal and a few other writers on Amazon. So those are both available right now.
All right, yeah, and like I said, I have it. I'm working my way through it, and so far it's really good. So, you know, feedback for you guys and to everyone else that I've gotten to has been like very, very very positive from me at any rate. So Moose, where can we find you and Ivy?
You can find me on Twitter at mlmooseauthor. I also have a blog / website, mlmoose.com, where I interview authors, as well as occasionally post a few updates via my pixie alter ego, Ivy. So you can also find the posts I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast on my website as well.
Yes, the genesis of this podcast actually did in fact come from Moose's blog. So there you go. And Crystal, where can we find you at? You have a new blog too to promote.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter, which is the quickest and easiest, at Crystal, 3 capital I's. And you can find my website at betweenworldswriting.wordpress.com, which I also have a blog, and I discuss things weekly, ranging in different writing topics. Or sometimes on a whim, just something that. So.
All right, Ferry. Our visitor from Germany. You're the last one, man.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter with the alias author HFerry. And you can also visit my website, fairyfiction.com.
Fantastic.
I mean, it's not really active at the moment, but I'm trying.
All right. And you can find me at Gingerman Editorial on the Twitters. I also have gingermaneditorial.com. The website is still under construction, still working on getting that to actually look halfway decent. Not a lot of activity on the website itself lately, but that'll be changing with the advent of this podcast. Also, you can find the podcast, like I said, on SoundCloud and iTunes, and I'm sure it will be showing up on lots of other places in the near future. So, again, thank you everyone for coming on, and it's been a lot of fun for me. I hope it has been for you, and I hope to have actually all of you back on to talk about whatever it is you're working on and any other topics that might come up as good subjects of discussion. So again, thank you everyone who tuned in to watch live, for everyone who watches later, and we hope to see you for future episodes. Expect them to be about every other week, and yeah, some of them will be live, some will just be posted, and in the meantime, y'all be good, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks,
See you all later. Bye.
All right. We're going offline.